Everything with a career is like you constantly have to be working and getting new business and striving to make connections with people.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
Hello and welcome to this week GWNL-Podcast, coming to a summer theater near you. This week's episode 11. What will they talk about this week? We have...
That's you, Brian.
Oh, me? Oh, that's me. Cool. Bryant.
And we have... Ben. We'll be discussing one of the most deadliest topics in an audio engineer's life. For those of you who can't see in the podcast world, I'm doing eyebrows movements. We're talking about work-life balance today in episode 11 from GWNL-Podcast. And I'm Joe. We have Ben and Bryant here. I've already introduced them. Whatever. Who cares? It's episode 11. And let's get started. Undercutting on time or money. Who wants to take a swing at this one?
Well, first of all, I mean, do we have to do any introduction of the concept of work-life balance? Is that pretty straightforward?
I think that's pretty straightforward.
Live life. Don't live life. Audio is the only thing that matters.
I mean, that's
else.
kind of that's kind of the nature of like how audio work generally is.
It 100% is. Like, let's just be honest. Like, it's kind of, in a lot of ways, like a toxic work culture. That's why you have like the union audio and like a lot of things like that. I definitely remember some live experiences that I had where you're just like, I just didn't sleep. Like, I definitely have had gigs where I've worked in 2 days. I worked and I got 15 minutes of sleep, and I worked about 37 hours. And it was a Friday to a Saturday. I mean, there have been weekends where I have worked 40 hours in an entire weekend, on top of a 40-hour a week job, on top of extra gigs, bar gigs and other gigs after work. It's not all the time, obviously, but they're like, obviously, So work-life balance, I guess it kind of matters.
Yeah, and when I started out like freelancing, I was doing a lot of like live sound stuff and event work. And I felt like I had to take every single gig. And at that point, in order to like get my foot in the door, I did have to. But I found myself taking gigs where it'd be like a 6 p.m. call, and I'd have to work until like 3 a.m. And then I would have another gig the next morning at like 9 a.m. Like
from like a different client?
An hour away. So I literally, there was one night that it was like an hour and a half drive from where I was living. And so I drove for the night loadout, did the gig, slept in my car for 3 hours, and then went to the next gig for a different company and ended up working like a 12-hour day that day. And I was like, yeah, I'm never doing that again.
Yo, that gig that I did that was like a 33 hours in less than 48 hours or something dumb like that. So the day I started, I worked 29 hours straight. Then I went back to my home, took a shower, got into my company vehicle with the equipment for the wedding gig I was doing, took a 15-minute nap at the venue. Like, I'm outside of this church for a wedding, and I'm like sleeping in the car. Sorry. Yeah, and Ben's like, I teach college.
I have stories too. No, my favorite story about this is that I was like, my day job was being a bus driver. And so I'd have to get up like 3 or 4 in the morning.
No way.
So all during the week I'm doing that. And then while I was a bus driver, I got hooked up with this DJ and sound company. And so it's like prom season. And so we're doing all these DJ gigs. So every like Friday, Saturday, I have like these DJ gigs to go way late. And then during the week, I'm getting up at 3 in the morning. So it's like I get myself used to this, like getting to bed at 8 or 9 at night. So I get up at 3 or 4 in the morning. And then the weekend would hit. And it's like, now I got to stay up until 2 in the morning. And so by Sunday, it's like, okay, I'm adjusted to this. And then Monday, it's like, so then it's Sunday night, I'm like going to bed at like midnight and getting up at 3, because I'm like switching my clock. So it's like every weekend I was switching between night shift to day shift, and that was rough.
Man.
I was like, okay.
That's awful.
So I didn't work the bus driver for that much longer after that.
Well, I recently, it's been weird because at my new job, it's kind of odd because like, so we had a show this last Christmas, a Christmas series, and I was there until like 11:30. Dude, I went home at 11:30. Like that's a pretty good night as an audio engineer. Shoot, man.
Yeah,
like and they were like commenting about, oh, that's so late. You should never have to work that late. And I was like, do you know what we do? Like, do you know what this job is? Like, I mean, how many times was I doing shows at college that was like 2 or 3 in the morning, Bryant? Like, seriously.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Or it's like, sometimes it's like, well, when I explain to people like kind of the nature of our work, if you're not doing staging, well, usually a lot of these gigs we are doing the staging, so it's like, oh, you're the first person there, and then
You're the last
one to leave too. But I really liked the gigs where we didn't have to do the stage, and so it was just like, hey, we're not the first people here, and we're not the last ones to leave this time. We're the second people here, and the second to last.
We're the third to last this time. The lighting has to get out.
Although the staging crews, I had a gig recently, and the staging crew had like 8 people in their crew, and we had 2 guys on our lighting and audio crew. And so the staging finished before we finished.
That's fantastic. I'm okay with that. I want to get out of there, man.
And we got there at the same time too. We had to wait for staging to set up. But
okay, so that's like live sound, but like what is it like in the studio? I don't even understand the studio. Like weirdos.
The studio is much more cush, but still, this goes back to what Bryant was saying. Sorry, I'm just going to keep talking as you try to interrupt him. I'm just going to keep talking. No, but Bryant said like when he was first starting, it was like you have to say yes to everything, and that's one of the things. My big things I tell everybody as they're getting into the industry. I'm like, the correct answer is yes. So every gig, you've got to say yes to everything because you don't know if you say no to something if that's going to cut off like shut doors in the future. Right. And so it works the same way in the studio. And like, I mean, I've had plenty of circumstances where I had a long day. Maybe I had to, especially like, I have teaching gig. The worst thing is when you have a teaching gig and then your studio gig. Your teaching gig, you got an 8:00 class or a 7:30 class. And then the studio, people want to be in there until 3 a.m, Yeah. And so I'll be like, it's like 9:00 at night. And I'm like, okay, sweet. I'm winding down, and then I get a phone call or a text message. Hey, can I come record in the studio? And it's like, yes. So they come in and we record until 2 or 3 a.m, and then the worst thing for me is like I get all riled up. You're listening to the music, so I can't just like go to bed right after. So I gotta like wind down. I've tried to do that a couple of those circumstances where I'm just like, okay. We finished the session. It's way late. I'm just gonna go crash, and then I'm in bed, and in my head is like the song going.
And all you can think about is just
it's like 1 or 2 hours later, I'm still awake, and I'm like, okay, so I have to get up and go watch a show or something like that to wind myself down. And so now
I remember that. He let me spend the night at his house, and he was like, he's like the king of popcorn. If you don't know, Ben is like the lord of popcorn. He has the elite hacks. If you nerds are out there, we watched like movies on his plane. We finished a gig, and I spent the night at Ben's house, and he made popcorn. It's good. It's good.
But we have to have that wind down time, right?
Yeah.
So, but the correct answer is always yes, right?
I hate that, and I'm going to tell you why I hate that, and I think you're wrong. Because the correct answer isn't always yes. And it's because sometimes, and you'll get this experience as you take gigs, there are some people who don't realize they're being abusive to you as a person because of the expectations. So you have a lot of different amateur clients. You have the amateur clients that think they know everything. And so they expect everything, and they try to convince you that they know what they're talking about what you actually know what you're talking about. Then you have the other amateur client who doesn't know anything and doesn't pretend to know anything, but their expectations are way through the roof, and they're just, well, that's what you do, don't you? Then you have the third amateur client who's like, they don't know anything, and they're too afraid to ask for anything. And so you can't even get the right information from them to give them the right service that they're asking or requesting for. And so, like, I mean, that's not your 3 basic clients, because there's always the 3 that are like, I don't know everything, so I'll defer to you. It just comes down to whether they're going to trust your expertise and your abilities in this instance or not. So
that's a good point too, because there does come this point where you've got to not look desperate. And I think that's kind of undercutting on time or money, is that if you say yes to everything and then you're like, I mean, it is, I still have to disagree with you that I think the correct answer is yes, especially when you're starting out to try.
Okay. I mean, yeah.
But there is, if you say yes and it's like, and then you're like, and they're like, yeah, we're just going to pay you such and such amount of money. And you're like, that's way less than I would really do, but I've got to say
always
yes.
negotiate pay in advance. I'm gonna be honest. Like, there are obviously some instances where that's not the case, but like, I cannot tell you how many people I've known, and luckily I had good mentors that didn't do that. Anyways, negotiate pay first.
Yeah. And that's what, I mean, over time, if you keep undercutting yourself and just being like, okay, I'll do it, and I'll do it for whatever little amount, you have to start setting a line, or else people take advantage of you. And I think that's what you're saying.
And then that can run into burnout. That's kind of what was. I was working on a project while I was in college, and it was my fault because I was undercutting myself. The person that I was working with asked me what my rate would be for the album, and I was thinking about it. I was like, oh yeah, I think I could do it for this. And then we got like halfway through it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like way in over my head. And so I actually ended up renegotiating with him and asking for double the amount. And luckily he was okay to do that. But it's
not everyone will be.
Yeah, not everyone's going to be like, hey, sure, I understand. A lot of people will just be like, nope, that's the deal you gave me. Sorry.
Yeah. I think everybody has stories like that where they, when they're starting out, especially the package deal sort of things.
Oh yeah.
And that's a whole nother discussion, is package versus hourly. But like, even like when I was in grad school, my professor there had this story about he was getting into doing sound for film and television, and he had this opportunity pop up. He hadn't really done any post-production sound like that. And they're just like, okay, well, we need, this is our project, and can you help us with that? And he's like, sure, I can help you with that. And they're like, well, we need an amount figured out. So he kind of did some numbers crunching real quick and gave them the amount. And then he like practically lost money on the gig because it was way more time than he thought, but it still got his foot in the door, And so the next time he was able to say, oh, like he wasn't able to renegotiate that, but the next time he was able to charge, an
appropriate amount,
appropriate rate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I bring this up, me and my wife talk about it because she teaches lessons. And when it comes to negotiating those prices and not undercutting yourself, you have to realize that, one, if you undercut yourself, you can't continue to do business. That's like the point of it. Likewise, if you undercut yourself, you're also undercutting all the other engineers out there working, because let's say you get it done for that cheaper price and that person says, oh, okay. And they come back to you again, or they go to some other engineer and they're like, well, this guy did it and he did just, they're going to, now it's a little different it's a little different out there in some instances, because sometimes you'll have people who have that kind of expectation, like, well, he did it for this much, why can't you do it for that much? You must not be as good of an engineer. You'll have those kinds of people. Generally, those guys are just dumb and not worth your time. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm definitely guilty of quoting exorbitant prices so that I don't have to do the gig, or if I'm going to do the gig, I don't care. I'm getting financially compensated well enough that I don't care how bad the gig is.
As I was like starting out, I was watching a bunch of webinars and YouTube videos on people that already had decently successful businesses, and they were talking about their business and how they like grew it to something where they could do it full time. And one of the guys talked about it. He I'm not going to say it, but he calls it the a-hole fee, where he will if he doesn't want to work with somebody, but this person's like really wants to work with him, if he knows they're going to be a pain in the butt to work with, he will give them add on an extra fee to make it so they won't work with him. And if they do work with him, he's like, well,
he's getting paid extra.
They're paying me the extra fee, so I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's difficult because like you realize, here's another thing too. So like this whole undercutting thing and like what we've been kind of talking about with this, we talk about undercutting on time and money, but like realistically, you're undercutting on your life because you're not really fairly being compensated for the work and the time that you're spending doing this, which you think, oh, well, I'm okay giving up that much time. Yeah, that's fine for now and maybe for the next 3 to 6 months. But what about a year from now? What about 5 years? What about 10 years from now? You keep doing that, and there is no future that you have because you're dedicating too much. You're giving too much to this career, into this industry. And that's different for every person for sure. But like you have to remember that those things really do come out to hurt you in the long run.
Well, yeah, I'd like to speak on that. I just recently had kind of a situation like that. So I had a full-time job that I was working, and then on the side, I also was renting out a space for my recording studio, and I was basically working like 2 full-time jobs between the two, and got to the point where I wasn't really happy doing either of them, and I didn't really want to go to my studio anymore. So I ended up getting out of my lease, and then I ended up getting a different job completely and moving out of state. But while I was trying to do those 2 things, I literally felt like I had no time to do anything but be at work, whether that was my full-time job or the studio, and it really wore on me mentally. And that's kind of the reason that I basically burnt myself out in that regard. And now I'm to the point where I'm finishing up a couple projects, and after those are done, I'm planning on just working on my own content, because I am just kind of like, I need a break from working with people, unless it's like
I hate people
my
too.
own, unless it's like my own like thing that I'm doing. So.
Yeah.
What was that, Joe? You hate people, right?
Yeah, I hate people. I'll be honest. If you're an audio engineer and you still maintain liking people, you must be really bad at your job. I'm calling every one of you guys out there. Because if you still like people, you must like. There's no way some sane individual that does audio. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally being smart.
No,
yeah,
that's true though. Yeah, it is
yeah, man.
I mean, you have to like keep your sanity, and it is a job. I mean, I think one of our society's things, and especially TV and film, present this idea that your whole life
You got to be hustling.
is your job.
Always hustling.
Yeah, and like you watch. I catch myself doing this all the time, watching like a TV show, and you're just like, oh yeah, that person's just like me, and then you realize, oh no, they're not. You're like, they are like consumed by their job, and they have no personal life at all, and they present these unrealistic things a lot of the times. I mean, there's plenty of stuff where it presents more balance too, but a lot of times we just see it as your career is consuming your life, and it's like you do have to have a life outside of it. And in the audio industry, a lot of times, especially in the entertainment industry in general, it's like it's this whole, are you willing to sacrifice enough for this career, this job? And a lot of times it is your personal life that they're asking you to sacrifice. And it's like, okay, well, we have this job and it's going to be super demanding. And it's like, okay, well, we have you, and you. And it's like, okay, which one of you is willing to sacrifice your personal life and your family to do this? And one hand goes up, and they're the ones who get it. And so it's like it's like set up to reward people who don't have work-life balance.
Right. And I would even say like a lot of like the single engineers who like aren't married and who don't really have to manage that part of their life. For them, they're like, what? I could just stay at home all weekend and do, whatever, or I can get paid a lot more money and, be able to go camping with my really expensive whatever. And like I kind of like in live sound, I feel like that's, well, no, I mean, it's the same way with any of these things. Cause like you start to sacrifice your personal life. You start to lose touch with those that matter in your life. And it's difficult too, because I've commented on this to Ben before about how like, it's almost kind of unfair because like I'm married, Ben's married. I think all 3 of us are married. Right.
Yeah.
And we have like careers in audio, and it's hard because like you have these other dudes who just aren't married and they're just like, yeah, I can spend hours doing this because I don't really have anything else. I don't have to maintain a relationship. I don't have to maintain like kids, a relationship, a dog. I don't know. Like I mean, most of the guys I knew in audio like were like had dogs, would go camping and just get away from it all. But it's hard because I feel like, especially in entertainment where you work when other people play and like that's your job. And like it's like I always make this comment too where I used to work at JCPenney's as like a cashier or whatever, and I just remember people be like, "Hey, you want to go shopping at JCPenney's later?" I'm like, "No, I do not. I don't want to go in that building at all. I've been there all day. Why do you think I would want to use my discount after I'm out of work?" No. And it's that way with me in audio. Like, I don't go to concerts. I feel bad because I had really good friends in college that invited me to their concerts, and I just didn't go because for me it was like, what am I gonna do? Go back to work? Like, that's what I feel like. I'm just gonna go. Like, like, no, I don't want to sit at work and chill. Like, I'm good. Like, I did my time. I'm done. I'm going home. Like,
see, for me, I'm able to kind of like split the two into two different things. It's like, okay, if I show up to a gig, yeah, I'm working this. But if I go to like a show, it's like, oh yeah, I'm here to enjoy the show. And of course, I do what every audio engineer does, and
critique it.
Critiques the
wow, why would you
sound.
EQ the snare that way? It sounds horrible.
Snare's gonna sound like garbage regardless. So
Yeah, you're right.
doesn't matter who EQs it.
Well, that's why I love like mixing with like an iPad, is because I can sit out in the audience and like just sit there and like, especially when I'm like teaching students to do stuff too. So I'm like running the DCAs and they're running the board and they think they're mixing it and I'm just correcting it.
That's mean. That's like actually mean. They're like, oh, I'm so good at mixing. You're like filling their expectations.
They're
and
like
just dashing
bringing up
those.
the guitar solo too loud and I'm bringing the guitar DCA down.
Like, nah.
But like I get to sit out there in the audience and I'm like, hey, you guys should sit next to me because I'm mixing this for my listening enjoyment in this spot. So if you sit close to me, you're going to hear, and I just like, it's nice because it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just enjoying the show. And it's like, oh, that sounds too loud, or I want to hear more of that. I can, adjust it a little bit. But yeah, it's, did I just say that out loud? So all those, everybody's going to know.
Now they know.
I think I've done that to both
any
of
of
you.
them.
I think I
doubt
did to both of you.
I don't care. I was like, whatever. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. I don't care.
I had to do that with we had one guy coming in and mixing in our concert hall who wasn't usually there, and he anyways, he worked for a sound company that the guy performing worked for, and like he was mixing the kick and the bass like way too hot, and our concert hall just like gets crazy.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about too.
Yeah. And
I think I remember this exact instance.
This is a different thing. I don't think you know this guy, but that would be the case with that too. But anyways, so I was running the DCAs, and I don't think he was paying attention to the DCAs, and so I kept turning the drums down because I was sitting out in the audience, and I'm like, this just sounds really bad, and so I kept like nudging stuff down so he wouldn't notice it to make it sound better. And then every once in a while he'd notice it and bring stuff back up. But he was used to doing, and it sounded different. It sounds different in the booth, But he was used to doing different kinds of shows. Anyways, I think we're totally off.
Well, sort of. But I mean,
it still kind of all pertains. But should we go on to like the next point?
Personal life matters.
Personal
I think
life
we've been
matters.
kind of talking a little
We
bit.
already
about
talked about that, but like the next one,
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
you'll
You're-
never really make it.
Yeah, you're just trash, and you're never going to be effective in audio. You should probably just find a different career.
No,
honestly,
this
IT's
one-
good.
This one is good segue because it really does go with what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
That of giving up your life to make it, and I think like you never really make it is really a term I use a lot because we all think that there's like this destination when we get there, and it's like, oh, then I will have made it, and then it's smooth sailing, or now I'm good. And I think everyone would be surprised to talk to, like, especially movie stars as the example I always use, and find out that there's all these movie stars and famous, we see them as famous actors, and if you talk to them, they would say that they haven't made it yet because they're still hustling to get gigs,
Right.
and they're still working hard. And we see them as just like, whoa, you're a big success. And they could have tons of money and they could have these multi-million-dollar houses, and they still don't think they've made it because they're not just being able to cruise. And I think that there may be some rare people that actually get to that point where they can just cruise. But for the most part, even those people that are really wealthy, like having dealt with some of those people, guess what happens when you're really wealthy like that? Then all of a sudden, all your effort becomes making sure all those people around you aren't stealing your money. And so it becomes a new job when you've made it. Now you have a different thing to deal with, is making sure to keep that money and keep that coasting. So there's no way to just get to that point and coast, you know?
Well, and I think that like to make it, or like the term made it, is very abstract and obscure. Like you can define it however you want. You know, some people, I think in some regards, some people can feel like they've made it by just being able to play on the weekends, and they enjoy that kind of a thing. That allows them to have like a family life and a personal life while still being able to do what they love. Other people, they just want to be able to create music for just their own sole purpose, well, their own like soul, like just themselves. They don't care if other people even hear it, and they get their enjoyment out of that. And I think that it comes down to like what makes you happy and what's kind of your end goal. I don't think it necessarily has to be like one. You don't even have to necessarily have an end goal to have necessarily made it, but I think you can define made it as it on a huge scale of things. So.
I would say we all know a good friend of ours, a great friend of ours. He's a buddy. He uses his audio experience to pay for his gear lust. That's it. Yeah. Like he doesn't. I love him. He's one of my best friends. I owe a lot to him. And he's told me that on many occasions, and he defaulted to me a lot in live sound situations. But I think I want to share kind of another story that I had from earlier when I was doing music, back when I was a musician rather than just an audio guy. I went to Comic-Con because I'm a nerd. Like, if you don't know, like gamer chair, obviously I'm a nerd. I'm a big nerd.
He is a nerd.
I'm a very big nerd. And when I was younger, I went to Comic-Con, and I don't know what possessed me, because I'm like, I don't draw. I don't do art. Like, I mean, I guess music's art, but whatever. But I'm in this thing with these comic artists, and they're talking about their careers in comics, because I thought it was kind of interesting. And I remember this one panelist, and I don't remember the guy's name. I don't even know if I've ever read any of his comics, but he was talking about how he went to art school, and he talked about he knew all these kids who were grinding, and he was like barely struggling to get through, like C's get degrees kind of guy, like not like he's not particularly good at the school system. He's not really the best artist in his program, and he just liked to draw. He just liked to do comics, and that was his thing. And like he was at a place that was kind of comic centric, and he talked about how he's now like 60, 70. I think at the time he was like 50 or 60. Now he's probably 60, 70. But he talked about how when he was in college, he knew all these people grinding it out. Like we're talking late on the weekends, every night until 2 a.m. drawing, working on their art, trying to become the greatest artist they can. And he says, I don't know any of those people in the industry. I don't know them. They may be there. I don't know. But he's like, I'm pretty sure, though, that they just got burnt out along the way because they spent all that extra time working to get good at something, and then they found out they didn't love it, or they burned themselves out so much that they just didn't want to deal with it anymore, and they gave up and they moved on to different, greener pastures. And he says, I wasn't the best artist. There are still people who are better than me, but I love what I do. I enjoy the process of what I'm doing. I enjoy the work that I get to do. There are obviously challenges. There's obviously work things that are associated with those things, but I was never the best. And I never was trying to aspire to be better than I was. And I really appreciated what he said about that. And that's kind of informed a lot of my thought process in my career, because he said, and I kind of even said this to myself, because I had a bunch of friends in high school that I played music with, and high school band. And then I think it was like 10 years after that, and I graduated from it, and none of them played their instruments anymore. And here I am still playing, in college and whatever, professionally. And I just remembered saying to to another good friend of mine, the director of the program, and I said to him, I was like, this one kid used to talk all this trash to me about how bad I was at my instrument. And I wasn't like bad. I was never bad, but he talked trash at me, and it was really annoying. And I said, do you know who's better at the trumpet now? And he's like, who? I was like, me, because I still play, and he doesn't. Gosh,
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
but yeah, like you never really make it in the sense that you like get done working. You're gonna be working. Just it's okay. We all are.
And it isn't always the person that maybe
Grinds.
puts in the most hours or the person that's the most talented. It's the person that the slow and steady wins the race. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, like you're not going to suddenly stop working. I mean, once you retire, obviously, and you got a nest egg make, but like you're not really going to have like no maintenance. I mean, even my grandfather, when he got through with his working career, he kind of floundered for like a year, and then he just started like working on carpentry because that's what he enjoyed, and he built up enough of a nest egg. But like my dad didn't know this, and so he'd like, oh, Grandpa, come do this thing. He's like, oh, I can't, I have plans. He's like, Dad, you're retired, how do you have plans? He's like, what, do you think I just sit around all day? I was like, man, that sounds great. I'd love to just sit around all day.
But it is like you can't, that you'll, if you sit around all day, you'll die. And like, seriously, it's true. It is so true. Like there's so many people, and like especially I mentioned I was a bus driver before, and there were always these bus drivers that would like retire, and then within like 6 months they died.
That's so
Because they
sad.
would just go and do nothing afterwards. And it was like tons of them. I mean, it was crazy. Like half the people that retired like died within 6 months to a year. And they're retired at like 65. You know, it's not like they're that old.
Yeah.
But it was like crazy. It's because they weren't doing anything. But that really takes us to the next point, the maintenance-free life, which Joe mentioned in his thing there.
I was trying to
His
lead
rant.
into it all
Yes,
smart.
that was good. No, you led into it nicely.
Yeah.
Because that goes with the made it thing is that, I mean, if you've ever like had a car that you had to maintain or owned a house, it's like literally a house will like turn to dust if you don't do anything to it for like 10 years, you know, like just completely. And so you have to constantly be doing maintenance, and there's no, I think that's the big misconception in society is the make it thing, that I'll make it and then I'll be good. And it's like, I'll make $1 million and then I'll be good forever. Like $1 million doesn't actually go that far nowadays, you know?
Yeah.
If you want to live,
Also inflation.
yeah, if you want to live at like $100,000 a year, $1 million is 10 years. And that's not even that extravagant of a lifestyle. It's nice, but it's not too extravagant. But like, it's constant. And it's the same thing with everything with a career is like you constantly have to be working and getting new business and striving to make connections with people. Sorry, Joe, you still have to deal with people. And constantly be hustling to do it. And there's just no coasting. I think there's just no such thing as being able to coast. You have
I
to
would,
constantly
yeah,
pushing. Yeah.
I would add to that too. I'm kind of lucky. I'm in a somewhat of a privileged position. I think we all are now that we all have pretty reasonable like day jobs now, where I have a consistent gig. I have turned down gigs because one, I was stressed enough with my job already that I was like, I don't want to add to that. You don't have to like. Remember, I guess I go back to that Comic-Con thing where like we talk about, you know, there's no such thing as a maintenance-free life. Well, I also think that sometimes we get this bee in our bonnet where we want to just like, oh, I feel like I'm so bad at this. I do this all the time. I mean, they literally hear me complain about this in our little text chain about, oh, I suck at this. Oh, I'm so bad. Why do I even do audio? I'm so total trash. I literally am that person. And it's because for me, it's hard because I am still climbing those mountains. I'm not done yet. I don't think I'm ever going to be done in audio. There's always something new. There's always new technology being done. There's new ways of doing it. I mean, shoot, they've talked about MIDI 2.0 coming out or something like that.
Yeah.
Like a new way of doing
been out
MIDI
for a
with
while.
more. No, it wasn't 2.0. It's like a new one that's even more channels or
even
whatever.
past.
Like, yeah. MIDI 4D chess. I don't know, whatever.
It's like the stuff with like the rolly seaboards that have been discontinued.
Well, there's those things, but I'm talking about like it was a new protocol.
There's always advancement.
But there's new tech.
Like there was a guy I worked with, and he pointed out that when he graduated from college, like computers were, he graduated from college like in the late 70s, and he's like, everything he does nowadays is on computers, and like he barely did anything in college on computers, so it's like he had to learn all that stuff after college, but there's constantly change, especially in a technical field like this. There's constantly things that we have to keep up on and change. And
you get a new operating system. Congratulations. Everything doesn't work anymore. Welcome. Oh, wait. Did I say that out loud? Redact that. Just do a big redacted like cross.
Welcome to beep.
I can't speak negatively about any brands, okay?
I can.
We've decided not to do that. Not to.
I repeal that.
So let's go on to the last one, unless you have something, Bryant.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think we've covered basically everything, including kind of the last point a little bit.
Yeah, the burnout. I did want to point out, this is an important thing. I've heard multiple stories about this, experience the same thing, and kind of tying into what we've talked about. A lot of people in the industry, they do go in as single people, and they can sacrifice everything, and then they get their families afterwards and stuff. And once they have enough clout to be able to say, oh, now I want to take some time off. So there's this one famous engineer producer that I was reading, I think it was an article or I was listening to an interview or something. And he was pointing out about how as he was hustling to work, he was, get up the ladder. He was doing like 14-hour days, and he'd do those all the time in the studio. And he realized after a while, it wasn't until after he had gotten enough clout that he could just come in for 8 hours, and maybe a 10-hour day at the max. And he looked back and he realized those other 4 or 6 hours in the 14-hour day were just like not efficient at all. And he would come back in the next morning and spend the first couple hours like redoing all the stuff he'd done in the last 4 or 5 hours of the day. And he realized that when he had the clout to just come in from 9 to 5 or whatever, his 8 hours, he got so much more done because he wasn't wasting all this burnout time, doing stuff. And your ears do burn out, and you make bad decisions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's what the old mixing style, when they mixed on analog consoles, it was like you work on the mix until late at night, and then you leave everything set up, you leave for the day, you come back with fresh ears, and you finalize the mix, and then you work on the next one, and you do the same thing.
That's like how I mix.
Yeah. We can just recall it anytime we want. But the other part of that is, if you go a couple hours and don't take a little bit of a break, your ears get fatigued too. So taking like a 10-minute break every hour or so.
Getting up and walking around helps. You can't just sit at these desks. Your body was not made to sit. Getting up and moving around is really good, and it gets you away from your work. You need that time to decompress from being focused. You have to realize your focus is like a muscle, and you can overexert that. And there have been days where I have worked all day on like festivals or all day at like just sound gigs where I'm pulling sound all day long, and I honestly can't even tell by the end of the day if I'm mixing well or not. I can't even tell if did I change that or not? Did I actually compress the drum? I can't even hear if I have. I can't even hear the EQ decision I made. Like I just bumped this 12 dB and I can't hear it. What the heck? It's a thing. Ear fatigue, man.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I don't actually bump 12 dB. That's a sin.
Yeah.
That's how you get feedback. Don't do that.
You would totally get feedback.
Oh, I get feedback. I get way too much as it is.
I've had that. I had somebody that was like testing stuff, and they would just like crank the fader all the way up to test it, and I'm like, what are you? It's like distorting and like feeding. I'm like, what are you doing? Just bump it up a little bit, It's like, and they kept doing it, and I kept telling them, I'm like, stop doing that. Anyway.
Well, it's not very far on the screen.
So yeah, work life. balance.
Just don't suck at life, okay? Do good, don't suck. And honestly, like, I don't know, summing it up. It's a job. It's not your life. And if you think of it as your life, that's a regret. Like, you know, balance life good, whatever. Live good. Die young.
Mix
Great.
good.
Mix good.